Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Soumajit Patro. I am an associate professor of sociology. I teach in Sidhu Kanu Birsa University of Purulia. It is in West Bengal. Today I will discuss social movements, governance and government. Particularly, we will focus on the relationship between governmentality and social movement. You all know that the relationship between governmentality, governance and social movement is not very simple. It is very complex. Now I should start with the very basic definition of social movement. What does it mean? Social movements are one of the important principal, very important major social forms through which people give voices to their grievances. So social movement involve grievances of the people, of the masses, and concerns about their rights, welfare, about their well-being, and they start as a consequence various collective actions such as protests, gheraos. They can start meetings that dramatize those grievances and concerns, and they demand that something be done about them. Social movement must have a minimal degree of organization, a minimum degree of coordination. The nature of such coordination can be range from a very loose, informal, partial type of organization to a very high degree of coordination, high level of coordination, and it may take a bureaucratized form. I can give you one example of that type of social movement. Say, for example, when you start agitating against the fee hike and you in a group go to your college or university authority to reduce the fee hike, you sometimes do not have that kind of well-organized kind of movement. On the contrary, you can find that the Maoist movement, it is highly bureaucratized, highly organized, coordinated form. The nature of such actions to register protest varies from one region to another, from one country to another, from one group to another, from one issue to another also. But one thing is almost clear, that social movements originate from concern of the people over the discrepancy, over our discrepancy between what is existing and what people want it to be. In other words, in different words, social movements are related with the people's concern. Now, social movements, all kind of social movements revolve around some issues that require intervention, that require policy reformulation and legislative action. You should note this term, policy reformulation, intervention from the government or legislative action, and this happens only at the level of government. That means when people start agitating in this way or that, in one way or another, they demand government's intervention to change the situation, to restore a desired or to establish a desired state of affairs, a desired state of social order. For the purpose of any social movement, the purpose of any social movement is to create enough pressure on the government. So the people who start social movements act as a kind of pressure group to create pressure on the government to bring about the desired change. Therefore, Therefore, the inevitable connection between social movements, any kind of social movement, and governmentality is well established from the very outset. We will discuss some aspects of governmentality. At least there are 4 aspects of governmentality that can be discussed. I will tell you these aspects in detail. The first one is legal pluralism. Legal pluralism. The second one is decentralization. The third one is rights-based approach, and probably the last one is forum shopping. All these 4 aspects, legal pluralism, decentralization, rights-based approaches, and forum shopping, have serious implications, as well as these act as determinants on social movements in many ways. Although these 4 aspects are not always related to each other. Now, I will discuss one by one. What do we mean by legal pluralism? What do we mean by decentralization, rights-based approaches, and forum shopping? Let us start with legal pluralism. As the name suggests, legal pluralism addresses the plural or varied nature of social life in which the law operates. That means we do have different type of religions, we do have different type of culture, different customs, and in this social matrix, the legal rules, laws, codes of conduct operate. Recent literature in the field of legal pluralism has focused on the implications of globalization, again another point, for the transnationalization of law, authority, and governance, and its implications on the reduced sovereignty of the states. You should note this term, reduced sovereignty. That means in a globalized world, the role of government is being reduced, and it also focuses on the increased power in the hands of transnational bodies that influence state-level law-making process in a globalized world. You know, when the power, when the domain, when the jurisdiction of the state is reduced and state becomes a minimal state, then other bodies, transnational bodies, NGOs, they fill up the gap, they fill up the gulf to make up the things, and they put tremendous pressure. They play a very important role in lawmaking, and this is a feature of today's globalizing world. In this context, in the context of India rather, I will tell that the practice of law making and governance is plural in many senses. The secular and democratic fabric of our country allows the practice of several forms of personal and customary laws. We have different types of communities, we have different types of religions, different types of culture, and ethnic communities existing in different parts of country, and they have their own customary laws, they have their own rules of the land. Another form of legal pluralism is through the practice what we can call decentralization. Decentralization is related to the way the state is transforming itself and can legitimately transfer power or sanction new powers, both above it through arrangements, agreements, negotiations between states, to establish and abide by the norms of international forums on the other hand, and below it through constitutional ordering, through constitutional reformulations within its own territory in respect of the relationship between power and authority between different levels of government and civil society. So if legal pluralism indicates the existence and practice of formal law and governance along with the informal codes, informal rules, informal folkways, mores, and codes of conduct. It is a feature of everyday life in our country that both legal sanctions, legal norms, and informal rules, informal norms are present. This is the essence of what we call legal pluralism. Then decentralization is the feature of our country also, in which the power is not centralized. You know all that one way to understand power is the capability to set the agenda. How do we set the agenda, in which capacity, in which manner we can set the agenda is also a measure of power. So decentralization in our country, all know the example of Panchayati Raj. It is basically a decentralization of power in which the rural folk, the people living in villages, they enjoy some kind of liberty to have a say in the decision making process, to play a role in the decision making process. They can mold and orient their own social life. We can say they can mold and orient their own future in future through these decentralized mechanism we call Panchayati Raj. Now the third one, which is rights-based approach. In short, it is called RBA. Rights means individual rights, rights as a citizen. You all know this concept of rights was not present in ancient period, because individuals and citizens should have right is a rather new concept. A right-based approaches, RBA, have been deployed by various groups, and it often reflects conflicts and contestations in a given context. Say, to stake a claim, to demand something over space and resources. Space is scarce, resource is scarce, so there are conflicts in staking a claim over space, for example, or resources. Right-based approach has an articulated from the vantage point of groups and associations fighting for rights of certain sections of people. You know, in our country, there are thousands of innumerable number of communities who are called backward, who are deprived of many basic amenities of life, who are poor, who do not have proper opportunities for their health care, who do not have education, even they do not have the basic minimum amenities like safe drinking water, like that. So, in such a country, right-based approach to governments, to the approach for governance, I would say, is very important. And a gap in that, a gap in the governance, a lapse on the part of the government encourages NGOs and associations, we can say civil society organizations, CSO, civil society organizations. There are many civil society organizations who fight for these, who try to compel the government to render services, required services. And these NGOs and associations often interpret rights as those of individuals within the strict definition of ownership. Thus, while elite, and you all know that these civil society organizations and NGOs are run by the middle class people. So, elite and middle class associations fight and advocate for example, cleanliness, beautification of their neighborhoods, rights of the slum dwellers living in adjacent slums for a clean environment, unfortunately are outrightly ignored in this discourse. This is, you can say, it is a criticism of this kind of middle class led activism, of the middle class led activism of the NGOs, non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, that they do not, or rather they forget to raise their voice against the causes of the poor people, against the causes of the tribal people, against the causes of the backward people who are living in fringe areas of our country and struggling for survival in their everyday life. And in their programs, in their movements, in their voices, these are miserably, unfortunately, absent. The last one is forum shopping. This forum shopping shows the complexities created by activists and civil society organizations that approach global institutions. It moves beyond the jurisdiction of our own government, and they move beyond that and reach at the global institutions to intervene and redress domestic grievances when the legal frameworks of the sovereign state doesn't seem to work to solve them. So this also has its own set of dangers, perils, and leaves social movements at the mercy of those very institutions that have opposed from the beginning. Now, what is the remedy? If the government, who are, we can say, who are the guardian of the people living under its jurisdiction, if they do not perform, if they do not render services, then the problem arises. And dissatisfaction of the people comes from that kind of non-submission of the services. They do not render the services in the manner in which people want it to be. So, dissatisfaction, from this kind of dissatisfaction, people's anger becomes prominent, people's anger becomes very, very acute, and they start movement. In these social movements in today's world, you all know that we have entered in a globalized world, and in this globalized world, this can be supplemented, rather supported by the social networking sites and social movement, lack of governmentality, lack of governance, and social movement. With all these components, a third element has been introduced, which is the networking, which is the interactions between the people living miles away. Today, in any type of social movement, maybe NGO-led social movement, maybe middle class-led social movement, in these kind of social movements, these networking sites are playing massive roles. And people living in America, for example, when in Nirbhaya Kando, Delhi government was shook and I can say was threatened in a very massive manner. People across the globe, people from Japan, people from USA, they supported the cause of the people who are staying nights after nights in open ends. So, any kind of social movement starts from the lack of governance. Thank you.